The first thing he knew was salt. Salt on his tongue, salt in his lashes. Salt crusted into the split skin above his temple, where something warm still bled in slow drops onto stone. Then came the cold, a bone-deep cold that had settled into him so completely he could no longer tell where his body ended and the soaked earth beneath him began. Somewhere beyond his closed eyes, the sea roared on, hoarse and exhausted, the way a man roars after he has already lost the fight. He tried to open his eyes. Only one obeyed. Through that single slit of vision, the world was gray on gray. A sky like wet slate, black rocks shining as though freshly polished, a scrap of ruined sail tangled around what might once have been a mast, and rain, softer now, almost apologetic. He did not know where he was. He did not know what year it was. He did not know his own name. The realization arrived without panic. It came the way one notices a missing button on a coat, a small, abstract absence. He turned the thought over in the dark velvet of his mind. It struck nothing. There was simply a wide, flat emptiness where a self should have been. And within that emptiness, only one thing remained, a word, a name. It rose up his throat unbidden, half a breath and half a prayer. Marisol. The name was warm, in a way nothing else was. It tasted of orange peel and wood smoke and something he could not place. A memory shaped like a doorway, with no room behind it. He did not know who Marisol was. He did not know if she was wife or sister or stranger. He only knew that when the storm had taken everything else from him, it had left him this. One word, one woman, one small, stubborn lantern in the dark. Marisol, he said again, and this time something in his chest cracked open. A gull screamed overhead. The sound jolted him fully awake. Pain came rushing in behind it, breaking across his ribs, his shoulder, the side of his skull. He gasped, and the gasp turned into a cough, and the cough brought up seawater. He rolled onto his side and retched, and when he lifted his head again, he saw her. She was running. A slim figure in a soaked gray cloak, skirts hiked above her ankles, dark hair coming loose from its pins and whipping in the wind like a black ribbon. A wicker basket bounced against her hip. A long-coated dog the color of sand ran ahead of her, ears flat, nose to the wind. He tried to call out. His voice came as a crack of dry leaves. The dog reached him first. It planted its paws in the shingle and began to bark in great urgent peals, as though it had found a thing it had been sent to find. The woman shouted something, a single sharp word, and then she was there, kneeling in the wet stones beside him, and her hands were on his face. Her hands were warm. That was the detail that broke him. After the cold of the rocks and the cold of the rain and the cold of being no one, her hands were warm. They cupped his jaw, turned his face toward the weak, sickly light, and he watched her eyes, gray-green, the color of the sea 2 minutes after the storm, go wide. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, you poor man." She had a low voice, slightly rough at the edges, like wool. He liked it instantly. "Can you hear me? Can you understand me? Don't move your head. There now, don't. Yes, look at me. Stay with me." Her fingers moved deftly along his temple, his throat, the line of his collarbone. A healer's hands, he understood. She murmured under her breath as she worked. "Not the neck, thank God, not the neck. The shoulder is wrong. The ribs, perhaps. The head. The head is the worst of it." And he watched her mouth shape the words and felt that he could have lain there forever, simply being looked at by her. "What is your name?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Marisol," he said. She froze. It was a small thing, a stillness that lasted perhaps the breadth of a heartbeat. But he saw it. He saw the color leave her face. He saw her gray-green eyes flick once, fast, to his, and away and back. "What did you say?" she whispered. "Marisol." He clutched the word like a man clutches a rope. "It is the only. I do not remember anything else. Only that. Only her name." For a long moment she did not speak. The rain fell. The sea hissed. Then, very slowly, she lifted one of her warm hands from his throat and pressed it flat against her own breastbone, the way a person might touch a wound to check that it was still there. "My name," she said carefully, "is Marisol Vance." He stared at her. She stared back. And somewhere on the cliff above them, a horse whinnied. Sharp, unfamiliar, and a man's voice, hard and lowered and hunting, called out to another in words the wind tore apart before they reached the beach. The dog's ears went up. The woman's head snapped toward the sound, and he saw something flash across her face that was not surprise. It was fear. She bent close to him. Her wet hair brushed his cheek. Her mouth came near his ear, and her voice was very quiet and very fast. "Listen to me. I do not know who you are. I have never seen your face before in my life. But whoever those men are up on that cliff, I do not think they have come to help you. And if you say that name to them, the name you just said to me, I think they will kill us both. Do you understand?" He did not understand. He understood nothing. He nodded anyway. "Good." She glanced up at the cliff, then down at him, and he watched her make a decision the way a soldier makes one, quickly, without permitting herself a second thought. "Then for the next hour, until I can get you off this beach, your name is Tobias. You are my cousin from Plymouth. You fell from the cliff path in the storm. You remember nothing because you struck your head, and that, at least, is true." "Tobias," he repeated. The name felt like another man's coat. "Tobias. And whatever else comes back to you, you tell me first. Only me. Do you swear it?" The voices on the cliff were closer now. Boots on shale. The wet snort of a horse. He looked into the sea-colored eyes of the woman whose name was the only thing he knew in all the world, and he understood that his life had just been placed into her hands. "I swear it," he said. She nodded once, sharply, and turned her face up toward the cliff with the lifted chin of a woman who had decided to lie to dangerous men. "Down here," she called. "Down here. I have found him. He is alive." And as the boots above began their scrambling descent, she looked back down at him one last time, and beneath the steadiness of her voice, he saw, plainly, that her hands had begun to shake. The two men who came down the cliff path moved like soldiers, though neither wore a uniform. The first was tall and lean, with a gray-streaked beard and eyes the color of wet flint. He carried a riding crop he did not seem to need, and wore a coat too fine for the weather. The second was younger, broader, with the flattened nose of a man who had been struck in the face often enough to stop minding it. He carried a pistol openly in his right hand, half tucked behind the lapel of his coat. Marisol was already on her feet by the time they reached the shingle. She had moved with surprising speed, putting her body between the men and the figure on the rocks, and she had taken her dog by the collar in a grip that whitened her knuckles. "Sirs," she said pleasantly, "have you come to help?" The bearded man's eyes did not look at her. They went straight past her, to the man on the ground. "Step aside, miss. He's breathing." Her tone was bright, almost cheerful. "Praise be, he is breathing. I thought him dead when I first saw him. My cousin is a great fool, sirs. He will go walking the cliff in any weather. Your cousin." The bearded man's gaze cut at last to her face. "That man is your cousin." "Tobias Vance," Marisol said without missing a beat. "From Plymouth. He came up to stay a fortnight with my father. The storm caught him on the path, home from the headland." The younger man with the pistol made a soft sound through his nose. It was not quite a laugh. "Is he now?" the bearded man said. "Tobias Vance, of Plymouth. Aye, sir. And you would be Marisol Vance. My father is Hesper Vance, the apothecary at Saltcombe by the Sands. Anyone in the village will know us." She let a small tremor enter her voice. "Sirs, please. He has struck his head most terribly. I must get him home before the cold finishes what the rocks began." The bearded man did not move. He stood looking down at the wounded man on the rocks, and the wounded man, who could not remember his own face, found that he could nevertheless remember how to lie still. He let his single open eye go vague. He let his mouth fall slack. He let a thin line of bloody salt water run from the corner of his lips because it was already running. "He has the look of a gentleman," the bearded man said slowly. "About the hands. He is a gentleman's clerk, in the law. My uncle was determined his son should rise." The bearded man crouched at last. He took the wounded man's chin between two gloved fingers and tilted his face this way and that, the way a horse trader checks a tooth. Tobias Vance, open your eyes for me, sir." The wounded man let his lashes flutter. He rasped. "I cannot. What is your name, sir?" The world narrowed to the breadth of a hair. "Tobias," he whispered. "Tobias Vance. And your trade?" "Law." He let his head loll. "Clerk. To Mr." He let the name die in his throat. "Forgive me." The bearded man held his face a moment longer. Then he let it go and stood. For one long breath, no one spoke. Then the younger man with the pistol said conversationally, "We are looking for a different gentleman, miss. Came off a yacht in the squall last night. About this one's height, this one's age. Dark hair, carrying a signet ring." Marisol did not look at the wounded man's hands. She did not need to. She had already, in the first 30 seconds of kneeling beside him, slid the heavy gold ring from his smallest finger and into the seam pocket of her cloak. He had felt it go. He had not, at the time, understood why. He understood now. "My cousin wears no ring, sirs. He's not yet married. More's the pity for the girls of Plymouth. As you can see, his hands are quite bare." The younger man's eyes traveled, slowly, over the wounded man's hands. They were bare. "Pity," the younger man said. "A great pity," the bearded man agreed, in a tone that suggested he meant something else entirely. He looked once more at the wounded man on the shingle. He looked at Marisol. He looked at the dog, which had begun, very softly, to growl from deep in its throat. Then he inclined his head with the cold civility of a man who had decided, for reasons of his own, to lose this particular hand. "We will not trouble you further, Miss Vance. Get your cousin home. The roads will be foul tonight. Sirs," should your cousin's memory return to him, the bearded man added, and now his eyes were on the wounded man, and they did not blink. "You will, of course, send word to the inn at Saltcombe. We are lodged there. The name is Crail. Mr. Crail." "Of course, sir." Mr. Crail touched the brim of his hat with the riding crop. "Good day, Miss Vance. Good day, Mr. Vance." He turned. The younger man turned with him. They walked back up the cliff path with the unhurried gait of men who had not yet decided whether to be patient, and Marisol Vance stood very straight and very still until they disappeared over the lip of the headland, and the sound of their horses faded into the wind. Then her knees gave. She dropped to the shingle beside him, so fast it looked almost like a fall. Her fingers were cold now, trembling outright, and her face had gone the color of skimmed milk. "Get up," she whispered. "Get up. Get up. I do not care how it hurts. You must get up now, before they come back. Get up, sir. Please." He got up. He did not know how. The pain was so vast, it felt like another country he was being asked to cross. But her hand was under his arm, and her shoulder was beneath his, and the dog was pressing against his other side, as though it, too, had decided to hold him together. And somehow, he was on his feet, and the three of them were lurching up the cliff path through the rain. "Who am I?" he said hoarsely, when his lungs were a bonfire, and her face was streaked with rain and something that might have been tears. "Marisol, who am I? Why did that man know me? Why is your name the only—" "Hush." She did not look at him. She was watching the path. "Hush, hush, hush. Tell me. Please." She stopped, just for a moment. The dog stopped with her. She turned her face up to his, and the rain ran down it, and she said, in a voice gone strangely flat, "Sir, I do not know who you are. I have never met you before in my life. And the only reason I can think of that, you might know my name." She drew the heavy gold signet ring out of her cloak pocket and held it up between them in her wet, white fingers, so that he could see, for the first time, the crest stamped into its face. A stag's head crowned, above a coiled serpent, above a single Latin word he could not yet read. "Is that you are the one man in all of England who was never supposed to." The cottage of Hesper Vance, apothecary, stood at the seaward end of the village of Saltcombe by the sands, where the lane gave up its ambition and surrendered to a thin track of crushed shell that ran down to the harbor wall. It was a low building of whitewashed stone, with a slate roof gone green at the edges, and a wooden sign on which a careful hand had once painted, in faded blue letters, H. Vance, remedies, tinctures, letting and setting of bones. Beneath them, in smaller and newer hand, someone had added, "and his daughter." Through that door, in the last hour of a dying afternoon, Marisol Vance half carried, half dragged a man whose name was not Tobias, and whose blood was running freely down the inside of her cloak. "Father," she called, and her voice was steadier than her hands. "Father, I need the back room. I need it now." A chair scraped in the dim interior. There was the sound of something being set carefully down, and then a man emerged from a doorway at the rear of the shop, wiping his hands on a linen apron stained with the green of crushed leaves. Hesper Vance was perhaps 60, with a long, careful face and a fringe of white hair that stood out around his head like the down of a thistle. His eyes, the same gray-green as his daughter's, though cloudier with years, took in the scene before him in a single sweep. He did not exclaim. He did not ask. He simply turned on his heel and led the way to the back room, calling over his shoulder, "Lay him on the long table. Marisol, the kettle. The clean linens are in the press. And lock the front door, child. Lock it and draw the bolt." She locked it. She drew the bolt. The long table in the back room smelled of camphor and rosemary. They laid him on it. The apothecary cut away his shirt with a small, wickedly sharp knife, working with the unfussy speed of a man who had done this many times. The wounded man watched the ceiling, old beams hung with bunches of drying herbs, and tried not to cry out, and mostly succeeded. "Ribs," Hesper Vance murmured. "2 of them, possibly 3. Shoulder out of joint. That. We can mend. The head is the question." His cool fingers parted the wounded man's matted hair. "Marisol, bring the lamp closer, daughter." She brought it. In the small yellow circle of its light, the apothecary worked. He cleaned. He stitched. 3 small, neat sutures above the temple. He set the shoulder back into its socket with one quick, unsentimental motion that made the wounded man's whole body seize and then go limp. Marisol held a cup of something bitter to his lips. He swallowed it. The world softened at its edges. "Father," she said quietly, when the worst was done, "there is something you must know." She drew the signet ring from her pocket and laid it on the deal table, beside a mortar full of crushed yarrow. Hesper Vance looked at the ring. He did not pick it up. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked at his daughter. And then, finally, He looked at the man on his table. His face had gone the color of old paper. "Tell me everything, child," she told him. The beach. The men. Mr. Crail, who lodged at the village inn. The lie about Plymouth. The name the wounded man had spoken before he had spoken any other. When she was done, Hesper Vance was silent for so long that the wounded man, drifting in the soft gold haze of whatever the apothecary had given him to drink, began to think the old man had not heard. Then Hesper Vance said, very quietly, "Daughter, do you know whose ring this is?" "No, father." "Do you know whose name is stamped beneath the stag?" "No, father." The apothecary picked up the ring. He turned it in his fingers, as though it weighed a great deal more than gold should weigh. Then he set it down, exactly where he had taken it from, and walked slowly to the small window above the herb press. He looked out at the rain for a very long time. "Father," Marisol said, "you are frightening me." "Good," he said softly. "You should be frightened." He turned. His face, in the lamplight, looked older than it had an hour before. "This crest belongs to the house of Marchcombe. The serpent is for the second creation, after the wars. The stag is older than any of us. The man who currently wears this ring is His Grace Caspian Aldous Marchcombe, 8th Duke of Marchcombe, master of 3 estates, and one of the wealthiest men in the south of England. He is also, by every account that has reached this village, a man newly betrothed to a marquess's daughter, and a man whose private yacht was reported lost, with all hands, in the storm of last night." The room was very quiet. The wounded man on the table closed his one good eye. Caspian Aldous Marchcombe. He turned the name over in the dark of his mind, the way he had earlier turned over the fact of his own forgetting. It struck nothing. It rang no bell. It was a name belonging to a stranger, and the stranger was, apparently, himself. Only one name in all of him still rang. "Marisol," he said softly, with his eye closed. She crossed the room in 3 steps. He felt her warm hand close around his cold one. "I am here." "Why?" he whispered. "Do I know your name?" For the second time that day, he watched her face go still. She did not answer at once. She looked down at their joined hands. She drew a breath that seemed to cost her something. And then, in a voice so low he might have imagined it, she said, "Sir, Your Grace, whoever you are now, there is something I didn't tell the men on the cliff. There is something I have not yet told my father. And I think I had better tell you, before whatever is left of your memory comes back, because it will be easier to bear from me than from anyone else." The lamp guttered. The dog, on the flagstones, gave a long, uneasy sigh. 11 years ago, when I was a girl of 17, I spent one summer as companion to a sickly young lady in a great house in Hampshire. I was there 4 months. I left under circumstances I have never spoken of to anyone in all the years since. And the young lady's elder brother, the boy who was being prepared even then to one day be the Duke of Marchcombe. She stopped. She looked at him. His name was Caspian, and on the night I left that house, he made me a promise that I have spent the last 11 years praying he would never, ever remember. Outside, the rain began again, harder this time, with the iron edge of a storm that was not yet finished with them. And somewhere on the dark road from the cliff, a horse was being saddled. He did not sleep that night. He could not. The apothecary had given him a draught, something thick and sweet that smelled of valerian and honey, and it had taken the worst edge from the pain, but it had not taken the words she had spoken before the lamp guttered. He made me a promise that I have spent the last 11 years praying he would never, ever remember. The words sat in him like a stone swallowed whole. They had moved him, with great care, to a narrow cot in the small room behind the back room. He watched the rectangle of gray window go from black to charcoal to the pale, dirty pewter of a coastal dawn. The dog, whose name he had learned was Brindle, lay across his feet, and the warmth of the dog kept him tethered to his own body. He tried to remember. He tried with the patience of a man searching a dark room for a coin he was not certain he had dropped. He felt for the boy he had been. He felt for a great house in Hampshire, for a corridor along which a young woman of 17 might have walked carrying a tray. He felt for a face, her face, the face of the girl Marisol had been, and the dark room gave him nothing. And yet, when she had laid her warm palm over his, when she had said, "I am here," something in him had answered before his mind had caught up. Some old, buried thing in his blood had stirred and lifted its head and known her, not as a stranger, but as a place he had once been allowed to stand. He turned his face to the wall, and for the first time since the sea had spat him onto the rocks, his eyes filled. Sometime after first light, the door opened. She came in carrying a tray, a wooden bowl of something that steamed, a cup of milk, a heel of brown bread. She had changed her cloak for a working dress of dark green wool, and her dark hair was bound up in a single thick plait. She had not slept either. He could see it in the bruised blue beneath her gray-green eyes. "Eat," she said at last. "Father says you must eat, or you will be no use to anyone, including yourself." "I want to know," he said. "I know you do. Marisol, eat first." She tore the heel of bread in half, dipped it into the broth, and held it out to him. "If you do not eat, I will not speak. That is the bargain I am offering you, sir." He ate. He ate slowly, because it hurt to lift his arm, and she fed him the bread when his hand began to shake. By the time the bowl was empty, the light at the window had gone from pewter to a thin gold, and the dog at his feet had begun, in its sleep, to snore. She drew the small wooden chair to the side of the cot and sat down on it with the careful posture of a woman about to give evidence in a courtroom. "Now, I will tell you what I can, and in return, I will ask 3 things of you. Name them. First," she lifted one finger, "while you are under this roof, you are Tobias Vance, not Caspian, not your Grace. If even one neighbor hears otherwise, the men at the inn will know before nightfall, and you and I will both be dead before morning. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Second, you will not ask me what passed between us in Hampshire 11 years ago. Not yet. I will tell you when I judge you strong enough to hear it. I have carried this alone for 11 years, and I will not have it dragged out of me by a man too weak to sit up unaided." He almost smiled. It was the first time since waking on the rocks that he had wanted to. "Yes." "Third." Her face had gone very still. "If, at any moment, your memory returns in full, and you find that the man you were before the storm wishes to do me, or my father, or this house, any harm at all, I want your word that you will get up and walk out of that door and not look back. I do not care how much it hurts you. I do not care how much it hurts me. Swear it. Marisol, swear it, or I will tell you nothing." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought, with a kind of distant, wondering tenderness, that he had never seen a braver thing than this woman demanding a promise from a man who could not yet remember whether he was a monster. "I swear it," he said, "on whatever I am, on whatever I will turn out to have been." She let out a breath she had clearly been holding. "Good." Her voice cracked a little. She covered it with a brisk movement, smoothing her skirt across her knee. "Then here is what I will tell you, and only this." She drew a breath. "Your name, your true name, is Caspian Aldous Marchcombe, and you are the 8th Duke of Marchcombe. You are 28 years of age, by my reckoning, though I have not laid eyes on you in 11 of those years. 3 weeks ago, the London papers announced your engagement to Lady Verity Halloran, only daughter of the Marquis of Stanage. You were sailing your private yacht, the Halcyon, when the storm took her 2 nights ago off the Saltcombe headland. The newspapers are reporting that you went down with her, along with all 6 of your crew. He closed his eyes. And the men on the cliff? I do not know who they are, but I know what they are. They are not the magistrate's men. They are not your family's men, or they would have been here last night, hammering at this door. They came down that path before the wreck of the Halcyon had even been reported in this village. Which means, Tobias, that someone, somewhere, knew you were on that yacht, knew the storm was coming, and has sent men to make certain that if the sea did not finish what it began, they will. The room was very quiet. Then I am not safe, he said. No. Nor are you. She did not answer. She did not need to. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, at the bruised blue beneath her lashes, at the dark plait over her shoulder, at the stubborn set of her mouth, and he understood that he had been given exactly one decision to make. He could ask her to send him to the magistrate, to Marchcombe House, to put him in a cart and deliver him, like a parcel, to whatever was left of the life he could not remember. Or he could do the thing his blood had already decided. Marisol Vance, I am going to ask one thing of you, in return for the 3 you have asked of me. And then I will not ask anything else. Ask it. Hide me, not for a day, not for a week. Hide me until I remember enough to know who tried to kill me. Hide me until I am strong enough to stand between you and the men at the inn. He held out his hand. After a long moment, she took it. You may stay, Marisol Vance said quietly, until the moon is new again. That is 16 days. On the 17th, with memory or without it, you will leave this house, and we will not speak again. 16 days. Her fingers tightened briefly on his. Mind you do not waste them, Tobias. The first of his 16 days was a small, quiet country. He did not leave the back room. He could not. His ribs would not let him. And the apothecary had pronounced, in the dry voice of a man who had seen many heads and trusted none of them, that the patient was not to set a foot upon the floor for at least 3 days, and 4 would be wiser. So he lay in the narrow cot. He watched the small square of window. He counted the beams of the ceiling. He learned the sounds of the house. The house had a great many sounds. There was the morning sound, which was the dragging of the bolt and the chime of the small brass bell as the first of the village came in for their tinctures. There was the midday sound, which was the soft clack of the pestle in Marisol's hand as she ground something in the great stone mortar, a sound so steady it might have been a heartbeat. There was the late afternoon sound, which was Brindle patting the perimeter of the cottage in slow, suspicious circles. And there was the night sound, which was the wind off the harbor, and the small, separate creaks of 2 different floorboards as father and daughter walked their separate, sleepless paths above his head. On the 2nd day, the apothecary came and sat with him. Hesper Vance brought a small wooden board and a set of ivory pieces, and they played a slow, silent game of draughts in the gold light of the late afternoon. The old man did not speak of who he was, or who he had been, or who he might yet turn out to be. He only made his moves, and waited, and made his moves again. When the game was over, Hesper had won, by a margin so small it had felt almost like courtesy. He gathered the pieces back into their small linen bag and said, without looking up, "My daughter does not give her trust easily, Mr. Vance." "No, sir. I do not imagine that she does." "She has given you a very great deal of it, in a very short space of time." "Yes, sir." I was going to say to you, do not waste it. But I find I do not need to." The old man rose. At the door, he paused. He looked back over his shoulder, and his cloudy gray-green eyes were, for a moment, neither cloudy nor kind. "Hampshire was a long time ago, sir. But it was not so long ago that I have forgotten what my child looked like the day she came home from it." He went out. The door closed. The wounded man lay alone in the deepening dusk and felt, for the first time, the true weight of the stone he had swallowed. On the third day, she came in to change the dressing on his temple. It was a small thing. She had done it twice before, briskly and without ceremony. But this time the light was different, a long, slanting amber from the seaward window. And this time, when she leaned in close to peel away the linen, her dark plait swung forward and brushed his shoulder. He felt her breath on his cheek. He felt the warmth of her wrist along the line of his jaw. And he closed his eye, not because of the pain, but because he was suddenly, helplessly terrified that if he kept it open she would see what was in it. "Hold still," she murmured. "I am holding still." "You are not. You are holding your breath, which is different." He let out the breath. She laughed. A small, surprised, almost involuntary sound, the first laugh he had heard her make. And the sound of it went through him like a struck bell. She finished the dressing. She did not move away at once. Her fingertips lingered for the briefest second at his temple, just below the new linen, where the skin was tender and warm. "You have a scar there," she said quietly. "An old one, above the eyebrow. It is not from yesterday." "Have I?" "Yes." "Do you," he said carefully, "know where it came from?" For a long moment she did not answer. Her hand was still at his temple. He could feel the small, quick stutter in her pulse. "Yes," Marisol Vance said. "I know where it came from." Then she rose and gathered the soiled linens and went out, and did not come back into the room until the next morning. That night, in the dark, with Brindle warm across his feet and the rain whispering on the slates above his head, the wounded man lifted one shaking hand and laid 2 fingers over the small scar above his eyebrow. It was, he found, almost exactly the shape of a fingernail. On the 4th day, the woman from Marchcombe House arrived. He heard her before he saw her. He heard the carriage, a heavier wheel than any that came down Saltcombe Lane in the ordinary course of things, with the brisk double clop of matched horses driven hard. He heard it stop at the head of the lane. He heard a single sharp female voice giving an order to a coachman, and then the soft whisper of skirts moving over crushed shell, and then the brass bell above the shop door. Then he heard nothing else, because Marisol had crossed from the back room to the shop in 3 quick strides, and pulled the inner door fast behind her, and the thick old oak swallowed every word. He lay rigid in the cot. Brindle had risen, very softly, and stood now in the middle of the small room, with his ears flattened. The dog made no sound. Neither did the man. They listened together to the murmur of 2 women's voices through the oak, and the man understood, without needing to hear the words, that the second voice was the voice of a person accustomed to being obeyed by everyone she had ever met. It went on for a long time, 20 minutes perhaps. Then the brass bell rang again. Then the carriage moved off, slowly this time, as though its occupant had a great deal to think about. And the lane was, once more, only a lane. The inner door opened. Marisol came in. She had gone the color of the milk she had brought him on the first morning. She closed the door behind her with deliberate care, and stood with her back against it, and did not speak. Marisol. That was the Dowager Duchess of Marchcombe. He felt the room tilt, very gently, as though the cot had been set upon the deck of a ship. Your mother. She is staying at the inn at Trevennick, 4 miles along the coast. She came down from London the moment the news of the Halcyon reached her. She is going from village to village, asking the same question of every house. And the question is, have you found my son? He closed his eye. He opened it again. What did you tell her? I told her that no man had been brought to this door from the wreck. I told her that the shore patrol had recovered 2 bodies on the long beach the morning after the storm, and that neither had been her son. I told her that I would pray for her, and that if any news reached us at this house, she should be the first to know of it. Marisol. She wept. Her voice cracked, very faintly. She is a hard woman, sir. But she wept in my shop. She is 62 years of age, and she has buried a husband and a daughter already. And she sat on the bench by my counter and wept. And she did not even bother to turn her face away from me while she did it. And I lied to her face, because I did not know that the men at the inn were not her men. And I will not gamble your life on a guess. He said nothing. There was nothing he could say. She crossed the small room. She sat down on the wooden chair by the cot. She put her face in her hands. There is more, she said into her palms. Tell me. She's offering a reward, £5,000, posted in every parish from here to Plymouth as of tomorrow morning. £5,000 for any news, true or false, of His Grace the Duke of Marchcombe, alive or dead, or in any condition between the two. He understood all at once what this meant. It meant that every fisherman on this coast, every farmer, every drunkard, at every alehouse from here to the Tamar, was about to become a hunter. It meant that Crail and his pistol-bearing companion were no longer the only danger. It meant, also, something else. Something he saw in the way her shoulders had begun to shake behind her hands. Marisol. She did not lift her head. Marisol, look at me. She lifted her head. Her gray-green eyes were dry, but only barely. You are about to tell me that £5,000 would clear every debt your father has ever taken on this house. That it would buy your father the rest of his life beside his fire, and that it would buy you, for the first time in those 11 years, a freedom you have never had. You are about to tell me that you have thought about it. You are about to apologize to me for having thought about it. And I am asking you, Marisol, please, do not. She stared at him. How? Her voice was a whisper. How did you? Because in your place, I would have thought about it. Any thinking creature would. And because you are a woman who made me 3 promises before she would even tell me my own name. And a woman like that does not turn a man over to his hunters without first hating herself for considering it. So I am saving you the trouble of the apology. There is nothing to forgive. She made a small sound. He could not tell at first whether it was a laugh or a sob. It was, he understood a moment later, both. Sir, she said, Tobias, whoever you are a very strange man. I am told I am a duke. Perhaps that accounts for it. She laughed, properly this time, a startled, watery laugh. And then she rose from the chair and crossed to the cot and did something she had not done before. She bent. She pressed her forehead very lightly, very briefly, against his. Her skin was cool. She smelled of yarrow and rosemary and the salt that never quite left this house. Sleep now, she whispered. Sleep, and do not dream of Hampshire. There is time enough for Hampshire. She straightened. She went to the door. She paused there with her hand on the latch. And Tobias, there was one thing more. Your mother said one thing more before she left my shop. What did she say? Marisol Vance looked back at him over her shoulder, and her face, in the late gray light, was the face of a woman who had just understood something she had not, until that moment, allowed herself to understand. She said that her son's last letter to her, written from Falmouth the night before he sailed, contained a single line she did not understand. He wrote, "Mother, if anything befalls me on this passage, send word at once to the apothecary's daughter at Saltcombe. She will know what to do." The latch clicked, the door closed, and the wounded man, alone in the gathering dark, with the dog warm across his feet, and the rain beginning again on the slates above his head, understood that whoever he had been before the storm, he had been coming to find her. The 5th day broke clear. It was the first clear morning since the storm, and the light that came in through the seaward window was a thin gold light, the kind that seems to have been washed too many times. Brindle the dog rose from the foot of the cot, stretched himself with the slow ceremony of an old man stretching by a fire, and went out into the kitchen to be fed. The wounded man heard the apothecary's voice in the next room, low and unhurried. He heard Marisol answer something. He heard the small, domestic chime of a spoon against the rim of a cup. It came over him then, quietly, without warning, that he was happy. It was a small happiness. It had no past behind it and no future before it. It existed only in the gold rectangle of the window, and the smell of bread from the kitchen, and the knowledge that somewhere in the next room, a woman with a dark plait was pouring milk into a cup. But it was happiness. It was the first he had known since he had been a man with a name. He understood, lying there, that it was also the last warning his quiet country was going to give him. By the afternoon, he was strong enough to sit up. By the evening, he was strong enough, with Marisol's shoulder beneath his arm and Brindle pressing anxiously at his hip, to walk in shuffling steps the length of the back room and out into the small, walled herb garden behind the cottage. The air there smelled of thyme and turned earth and the sea. He stood for a long time with one hand on the low stone wall, looking out over the tile rooftops to the pewter line of the harbor beyond. After a while, she said, very quietly, "What do you remember today?" He thought. He had been thinking all day about whether to answer this question honestly when it came. A room, a long room with green-painted walls, a window with a deep seat, and a cushion the color of yellow moss. A book left open on the cushion, face down. I do not know what book. I know only that I have been in it, and that whoever sat by that window before me had small, narrow feet. He felt her go still beside him. Anything else? The taste of an apple, a green one, sour, eaten quickly, as though I had stolen it. He paused. And the back of someone's neck, a girl's neck. The hair pinned up off it. A single small mole at the very top of the spine. He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at the harbor. He felt, rather than saw, her hand rise, slowly, almost involuntarily, to the back of her own neck, and rest there for the briefest moment, and fall. "Sir," Marisol said. Her voice was the careful of a woman walking on ice. "I think you are remembering more than you have told me." "I think I am remembering more than I have words for. That is not the same thing." She was quiet a long time. The light deepened. A gull crossed the harbor. The room with the green walls was the morning room at Wrenholt. Wrenholt was the Halloran estate in Hampshire, before the present Marquess sold it. It was where I was companion to the young lady I told you of. A pause. She was your sister, Tobias, not by blood, by the second marriage of her mother to your father. You called her Hen, though her name was Honoria. She died in the autumn of the year I left that house. She was but 15 years of age. He closed his eyes. He did not weep. The grief was too far inside him for that, buried under 11 years and a storm and a head full of fog. But something low in his chest tightened and would not loosen, and he understood that he had loved her. This Hen, this Honoria, and that some part of him had been mourning her for 11 years without being told why. "And the apple," he said. "The apple was from the orchard behind the kitchen. We were not, as a rule, permitted in the orchard. You were 7 and 10 that summer, sir. I was 17. Your sister was 14, and dying by inches. And you and I," she stopped. "You and I conspired every afternoon for 3 weeks to bring her one stolen apple, because the cook's apples were waxed and tasteless, and Honoria said the orchard ones tasted of being well. We were caught. Twice. The second time, the head gardener struck me across the face with the back of his hand. You took the blame. You told the gardener you had ordered me into the orchard. You told your father the same. Your father struck you for it. With the buckle of his belt, sir, across the temple. You bear the scar to this day." He opened his eyes. The harbor was a long way off and very small. "That is not a thing one forgets. You did not forget it, Tobias. The storm forgot it for you. There is a difference." He turned, then fully toward her, with the wall at his back. She did not step away. They stood very close in the gold-gray dusk of the herb garden, and he looked down into her gray-green eyes, and she looked up into his, and neither of them, for a long moment, found anything they could safely say. He lifted one hand. He laid the backs of his fingers very lightly against her cheek. "Marisol, whatever the promise was that I made you on the night you left that house, do not. Whatever it was, I should like, very much, to make it again now. Tobias, I am asking you, in daylight, knowing what I know, which is almost nothing, which is perhaps exactly the right amount." She looked at him. Her eyes filled and did not spill. "You made me 3 promises that night, sir," she whispered, "and I am not yet ready to ask for any of them. Not while there are men at the inn. Not while your mother is 4 miles up the coast. Not while one of us is still, in the eyes of the law, dead at the bottom of the sea." She stepped back. She turned. She walked back across the herb garden toward the cottage door. At the threshold, she looked back over her shoulder. "But you may know this, Tobias. When you are alive again, when you are a man with a name, on dry ground, with no one hunting you, you may ask me, and I will give you the answer I could not give the boy you were." The door closed behind her. He stood alone in the herb garden with the gulls crying over the harbor, and the small scar above his eyebrow ached as though it had been opened that morning. The trouble came on the 7th day, as he had known it would, though not from the direction he had expected. It came in the form of a child, a barefoot, sand-haired boy of perhaps 9 years, who appeared at the back of the cottage at first light, with a folded square of paper in one fist and a halfpenny in the other. The halfpenny had been given to him at the inn. The folded paper was for the apothecary's daughter. He would not give it to anyone else. He had been told that if he gave it to anyone else, he would not get the second halfpenny that had been promised him on his return. Marisol took the paper. She gave the boy a piece of brown bread and an apple and sent him off. She came into the back room with the paper still folded, and she sat down on the wooden chair by the cot, and she did not open it for a long time. "Read it," he said. "In a moment, Marisol. In a moment, Tobias. I am gathering myself." She gathered herself. She unfolded the paper. She read it once, in silence, and her face did not change. She read it a second time. Then she handed it to him, and she rose, and she went to stand by the small window with her back to the room. He read it. The hand was a man's hand, economical, well-formed. There was no salutation. There was no signature. There were only 4 lines. Miss Vance, a man fitting the description, was carried up the cliff path at Saltcombe on the evening of the storm. A woman fitting your description carried him. We are patient men. We are not infinitely patient. You have until the new moon to deliver the gentleman in question to the inn at Saltcombe, alive and able to speak. After the new moon, we will come for him ourselves, and we will not, in that case, be over-careful of who else is in the house when we do. He read it twice. He folded it. He set it on the bedclothes. The new moon is 9 days from tonight. Yes. That is 1 day fewer than the 16 you gave me. Yes. Marisol. She turned. Her face, in the bright morning light, was perfectly composed, and the composure of it was the most frightening thing he had yet seen on her. I have been thinking, Tobias, and I have come to a conclusion. Will you hear it? Yes. You cannot stay here. Not 9 days. Not 3. Not one more than is absolutely necessary. They know this house. They know my face. They know that I carried you up that path. The longer you remain under this roof, the more certainly they will come down upon it, and the less chance my father and I will have of surviving the night when they do. Then I leave today. You leave tonight. After dark. There is a man at Trevennick, a fisherman who owes my father a debt he has never been able to repay. He has a small boat. He will take you, by sea, around the headland to the cove below Marchcombe House. From there, you will walk up to your own front door, and you will present yourself to your own mother, and you will let her, and the men she keeps, do whatever a duke's mother and a duke's men do for a son who has come back from the dead. Marisol, I have not finished. From the moment you set foot on that fisherman's deck, you and I have never met. You woke on the rocks, alone. You crawled, by the grace of God, to the cove. A passing boatman found you. You do not know my name. You have never heard of an apothecary's daughter at Saltcombe by the sands. Do you understand me, Tobias? You do not know my name. I will not say that. You will. Marisol, I will not say that. She crossed the room. She knelt at the side of the cot, so that her face was on a level with his, and she took his hand, and she held it tightly between both of hers. Her hands were not warm any longer. They were as cold as they had been on the cliff path on the first day. Listen to me. Whoever sent those men sent them because someone profits by your death. It is not the sea that wants you dead, sir. It is a person. Possibly a person in your own house. And when you walk back through that house's door, you will not yet know which person it is. You will not know whose food to eat, or whose tea to drink, or whose carriage to ride in. The only thing you will be able to know is whose name you have not spoken. And I am asking you, begging you, to make certain that mine is one of them, until you know who tried to kill you. Then, and only then, may you say my name aloud. Do you swear it? He looked at her. He understood, with a slow, cold clarity, that she was right. He understood also that she had just asked him for the 4th promise, and that this one, of all of them, was the one he did not wish to give. I swear it, he said. Her eyes filled. This time 1 tear fell. She did not wipe it away. She let it fall onto the back of his hand. Thank you, Marisol whispered. She rose. She turned away. At the door, without looking back, she said, There is one thing more. The Lady Verity Halloran, your betrothed. I have not told you this because I did not wish to confuse you while you were too weak to think clearly. But you should know it before you go. Tell me. I have never met her, sir. But she is the niece of the head gardener at Wrenholt, the man who struck me 11 years ago. The match was arranged by your father, 2 years before he died. And in the village of Trevennick, where my fisherman lives, it is whispered that the gardener's family has waited a very long time for a Halloran girl to one day be Duchess of Marchcombe. and that they would not be sorry if she were a duchess, sooner rather than later. The door closed. He lay alone in the cot, with the folded letter on the bedclothes beside him, and he understood, for the first time in any way that was not abstract, exactly who, in the chess game he had not yet remembered playing, the queen had always been intended to take. The fisherman of Trevennick was named Penrose Quill, and he was 63 years old, and he had not, as Marisol had warned, said more than 30 consecutive words to any man living since the day his wife had been taken by a fever in the spring of 1809. He spoke now in single syllables. Step, mind, down, sit. It was the perfect manner of speech for a man being asked to row a vanished duke around a headland in the dark. The night was moonless. The tide was running out. There was a wind off the land that smelled of cut hay and chimney smoke, and the small boat moved through the dark water with a slow, slapping rhythm that made his cracked ribs ache, and his head ache, and his heart, foolishly, ache worst of all. He had said his goodbye to her at the back door of the cottage, in the kitchen, with Brindle pressing anxiously against both their legs and the apothecary, kindly looking the other way. He had said it quickly. He had said thank you, and I will not forget, and Marisol, and she had laid one finger across his lips and shaken her head, and said only, go. Go now. He had gone. But before he had gone, he had done one thing more. He had taken the heavy gold signet ring from his coat pocket. He had reached for her hand. She had let him take it. He had pressed the ring into the cup of her palm and folded her cold fingers over it. Until I come for it. Tobias, until I come for it, Marisol, or until you read in the papers, with your own eyes, that I am dead a second time, whichever shall come first. She had not answered. She had only closed her hand around the ring, and turned, and gone back into the cottage, and left him standing alone in the lane with Penrose Quill at the gate. That had been 40 minutes ago. It felt like a year. The boat rounded the dark shoulder of the headland in the small hours. The cove below Marchcombe House opened before them, a thin curve of pale shingle, a crooked stone stair climbing the cliff, a single lantern burning at the head of the stair, as though some servant had hung it there each night for a great many years against the homecoming of a master who never came. Penrose Quill brought the boat in without a word. The keel scraped the shingle. The old man held out one calloused hand. The wounded man took it, and was helped over the side, and stood, swaying on the cold stones of his own beach. Sir, Penrose Quill said. It was the first time he had used the word. Yes. Mind the third stair from the top. It's loose. Has been since you were a boy. The wounded man stared at him. You knew me. All my life, sir. You knew, the moment you saw me on the path tonight. Aye. Then why? Because she said, don't. Penrose Quill's eyes were lost in shadow. And in this village, what the apothecary's daughter says, a man does. Now go. The stair is steeper than it looks. The boat slid back into the dark. The wounded man stood alone on the shingle with the lantern at the head of the stair, burning above him like a small, patient star, and he climbed. He climbed slowly because of his ribs, and the stair was indeed steeper than it looked, and the third step from the top did indeed move under his foot. He smiled, a small, tired, almost private smile, and at the top of the stair he looked back once at the dark water, and he thought, she knew. She knew the third stair. She knew about the apple, and hen, and the gardener's hand. There is no part of my boyhood that this woman does not already hold. Then he turned, and he walked, alone, up the long path of close-cropped grass between the yews, toward the great pale shape of the house at the top of the slope. There was a single window, lit on the south face. It was the window of the small writing room that had been his mother's since before he was born. He had not, until the moment he saw the light in it, been certain he could remember which window was hers. He climbed the terrace steps. He crossed the terrace. He stood, for a long moment, before the great oaken door of his own house, and he understood that he did not have the key. He had never, in his life as a duke, had the key. The door had always been open to him. He lifted his hand. He knocked. He heard, beyond the door, the sound of a chair scraping back. He heard footsteps, quick, light, hurrying. He heard the bolt being drawn, the wrong way, the way of a person too eager to be careful. And then the door swung open, and a small, straight-backed woman in a dressing gown of dark blue silk stood in the lamplight with a candle in her hand, and her face went, in one slow, unmoored second, the color of bone. "Caspian," whispered the Dowager Duchess of Marchcombe. He did not, until that moment, fully believe it of himself. "Mother," he said. The candle fell from her hand. He caught it, just, with his unhurt arm, before it could set fire to her sleeve. She did not seem to notice. She was already, with the small ferocity of a woman who had buried too many people to be careful any longer, in his arms. "You wrote to me," she said into his shoulder. "You wrote to me, you wretched, wretched boy. You wrote, if anything befalls me, send word at once to the apothecary's daughter at Saltcombe. And I did not know what you meant. I did not know who she was. I sat in her shop, Caspian, and I wept like a fool in front of her. And now you are here, you are home, and you are going to tell me, at once, what in God's name you knew was coming for you." He held her, and over her shoulder, in the dim great hall of his own house, he saw the long carved staircase, and at the top of the staircase, half hidden in the shadow of the gallery, a tall, pale figure in a white nightdress, who had come, silently, to the rail at the sound of the door. A young woman with corn-colored hair unbound to her waist, and the still, watchful face of a person who had been listening for the sound of that door for a long, long time. Lady Verity Halloran did not come down. She did not speak. She only watched. And he understood, with a slow, cold lifting of the small hairs at the back of his neck, that whatever he chose to remember in the next 9 days, and whatever he chose to forget, he would have to do it under that gaze. The first 3 days at Marchcombe House were a careful country, more dangerous than the small one he had left. His mother, after the first night, did not weep again. She gathered herself the next morning with the brisk, terrible competence of a woman who had been gathering herself for 62 years. And by the time the household sat down to its first breakfast under the hand of its returned master, she had constructed the version of events that the rest of England was now to be told. The Duke of Marchcombe had been thrown clear of the Halcyon in the storm. He had been carried by the tide and washed up in a small cove some miles down the coast. He had been found by a passing boatman and brought home. He remembered, alas, very little of his ordeal. Of an apothecary's daughter at Saltcombe by the sands, the fortress said nothing. He let her build it. It was the only roof under which he could safely stand, while he hunted what he had come home to hunt. So he played the part. He sat at the head of his own table. He let his valet, a thin, careful man named Holbrook, who had been with him since he was 20, dress him in the clothes of a man he could not yet remember being. He received, in the long green drawing room, the first cautious callers. The rector, the local magistrate, the steward of the home farm. He listened. He observed. He spoke as little as the part allowed. And all the while, in the small, quiet country he had brought back inside himself from Saltcombe, he watched. He watched his mother. He watched Holbrook. He watched the steward's hands when the steward spoke, and his mother's eyes when the steward's hands moved. He watched, above all, the woman to whom, 3 weeks ago, in another life, he had asked the Marquess's daughter at the public dinner at Stanage House to be his wife. Lady Verity Halloran was beautiful. He had not, on the staircase that first night, been quite able to see how beautiful. He saw it now in daylight, at table, on the gravel of the south terrace, where she walked each afternoon, with one hand resting on the head of his mother's old wolfhound. She had the long, cool, classical loveliness of the women in the older Marchcombe portraits. Beauty that doesn't blaze, but only gathers, slowly, the longer one looks at it. She spoke little. She listened well. She came to him each morning after breakfast and asked, with grave courtesy, after his health. She did not, in any of those mornings, ask him whether he remembered her. He found this, on reflection, the most interesting thing about her. On the 4th morning, he took down from the great mahogany shelves of his own library the small leather-bound volume that the steward had named to him as the rent roll of the home farm. He carried it to the desk in the south window. He opened it. He read for an hour. He understood, before the hour was out, that the rents of 3 of his tenant farms had been quietly raised, 4 months earlier, by a margin so small that no single farmer would protest, but so consistent that the cumulative income of the estate, over a year, would increase by a sum almost exactly equal to the annual interest, he discovered on the next page, on a private debt that the previous Duke of Marchcombe had drawn, 2 months before his death, from a London bank he had never previously used. The debt was held in the name of Marchcombe. The signature on the loan was not his father's hand. The signature, when he held it up to the light, was, very faintly, his own. He sat for a long time looking at his own forged hand on a paper he could not remember signing. Then he closed the book, very gently, and rang for Halbrook, and asked, in a tone of perfectly even cordiality, whether his betrothed might be persuaded to walk with him in the long gallery, alone. She came. She walked with him beneath the eyes of his ancestors, with her hand resting in the crook of his arm, exactly the way her hand had rested on the wolfhound, with the same light, courteous, faintly absent pressure. They walked the length of the gallery in silence. At the far window, where the gallery ended in a great half-circle of leaded glass overlooking the park, he stopped. Verity. Caspian. In the storm, I lost a great deal. I have, since coming home, recovered a portion of it. There is one thing I cannot recover, and that I should be very grateful to have from your own lips. Of course. Whose idea was the wedding? She did not answer at once. She turned her head and looked out at the park. Her profile, against the leaded glass, was as still and as cool as a profile carved on a coin. Your father's, principally. Mine, in part. Yours? She paused. Yours, my lord, only insofar as you were good enough not to refuse it. And the loan? At the London bank? Drawn 2 months before my father's death? It was a stone thrown into a still pond. He watched, with a grim and almost loving attention, the rings of it move outward across her face. They moved very slightly. They did not move enough. But they moved. I do not know, Lady Verity Halloran said carefully, what loan you mean. Don't you? No, my lord. Verity. I have not, in 9 days, spoken aloud a single name that I did not wish my enemies to hear. I am about to break that habit. I'm going to say a name to you now. I should like you, while I say it, to keep your face turned to the window. I shall be watching it very carefully. She did not turn. Her hand, on his arm, did not move. Marisol Vance, of Saltcombe by the Sands. For perhaps the breadth of one slow heartbeat, nothing in her face changed at all. Then, in the corner of the leaded glass, he saw it. A small, fast tightening at the corner of her mouth. the smallest possible whitening of the knuckle of the smallest finger of the hand that rested on his sleeve. A flicker in the reflection of her eye that was not surprise, but recognition. And under the recognition, older, deeper, colder, something that he understood was fear. She had, after all, heard the name before. He smiled at her, very kindly, kissed her gloved hand, and led her back down the long gallery beneath the eyes of his ancestors. He did not speak again. He had what he had come for. That night, he wrote one letter. He did not give it to Halbrook. He gave it to the elderly groom who had taught him to ride at the age of 6, and who, of all the men in Marchcombe House, was the only one whose loyalty he could remember without effort. The letter was addressed to Penrose Quill, fisherman of Trevennick. It contained 5 words. She is in danger. Come, the Marchcombe Harvest Ball was the oldest of the great annual gatherings of the South Country, and in the autumn of that year, it was held, as it had been held every autumn for 9 generations, in the long ballroom on the north front of Marchcombe House. 234 guests had been invited. 230 had come. The Dowager Duchess had remarked, with grim satisfaction, that she had not, in 40 years, seen a slimmer harvest of regrets. The candles in the great chandeliers burned a yellow so warm and so deep that it made the gilding of the ceiling appear almost soft. The orchestra, brought down by special carriage from Bath, was tuning in the gallery. He stood at the head of the room, beside his mother, beside his betrothed. Lady Verity Halloran was in pale silver. The diamonds at her throat had been his mother's once, and his father's mother's before that. She held a fan of carved ivory in one gloved hand, and her hand did not tremble. She had been bred for occasions of this exact weight, and she met them with the cool, unsmiling competence of a soldier holding a position she did not expect to hold long. He bowed over her hand. He bowed over the hand of the Marquess, her father, who had crossed 3 counties to be here. He bowed over the hand of the Marquess's brother, the Honorable Linus Halloran, whom, on the long carriage ride back from Saltcombe 2 days earlier, the elderly groom had quietly identified, after patient inquiry in the village taverns, as the man whose traveling name in this part of the country was Mr. Crail. He did not, when he bowed over Mr. Crail's hand, permit anything in his face to alter. He danced the first dance with his mother. He danced the second with Lady Verity. He danced the third with the eldest unmarried daughter of the magistrate. He danced the fourth with no one, because at the 4th dance, the great oaken doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and a small woman in a plain dark green gown stepped through them, alone, and stood quietly at the edge of the candlelight, and waited. She wore no jewels. She wore no silk. Her dark hair was bound in a single thick plait over her shoulder. On her smallest finger, where she had worn it openly across 2 counties on the journey, there was a heavy gold signet ring stamped with the device of a stag and a serpent. The orchestra continued to play. No one stopped it. But a silence, small at first, and then larger, and then very large indeed, moved outward from the doors of the ballroom in a slow, perfect circle. He crossed the room to her. He crossed it slowly, because of his ribs, and because he wished every guest to have the opportunity to understand what they were watching. He saw, as he walked, the Marquess's face go rigid. He saw Linus Halloran's hand move, very slightly, toward the inside of his coat, and stop, because 2 of the elderly grooms quietly positioned cousins from the home farm, both standing in the livery of Marchcombe footmen, had taken one quiet step closer to Mr. Crail's elbows. He saw his mother's face. He saw Verity's face. He saw, above all, Marisol Vance's face, which, against every instruction he had given her, was perfectly composed. He stopped before her. He bowed. "Miss Vance, you are very welcome to my house." "Your Grace, you have brought back to me a thing of mine, I believe." "I have, sir." She drew the heavy gold ring from her smallest finger. She held it out to him in the cup of her palm. He did not take it. He took, instead, the hand beneath it. He turned that hand over in his own. He closed her fingers, very gently, around the ring. He raised the closed hand, and he kissed her knuckles. And then, without releasing her, he turned to face his ballroom. "I will be brief," said the 8th Duke of Marchcombe, "as a man should be, who has kept 200 friends from their dancing. There is a great deal I do not yet remember of the night of the storm. There is, however, one thing I remember perfectly. I did not wash up by the grace of God in any cove. I was carried, by this woman, half a mile up a cliff path in the rain, with a head she had reason to believe was broken, and 3 ribs she had reason to believe were finished. She lied, twice, to 2 armed men, to keep me alive. She fed me, and dressed my wounds, and hid me in her father's house at her own peril for 6 days, and asked nothing in return, except that I never speak her name." He paused. The silence in the ballroom was now so complete that a single candle, far down the room, could be heard guttering. "I have, 4 nights ago, learned the name of the man who arranged my death. I will not, this evening, name him. I leave the naming to His Majesty's law, which will receive, before the morning, a letter from my hand naming him, his confederate, and the persons who assisted him. I say only this. I have, in the last 12 days, lost a great many things, including, for some hours, the entire shape of my life. And I have come home with one thing in the place of all of them, which is the certain knowledge that the woman beside me is the only person in this house, this evening, to whom I owe my life, and the only person in whose hand I would willingly place it again." He turned to her. He went down, despite his ribs, on one knee. "Marisol, 11 years ago, in the orchard at Renholt, on the night you left that house, I asked you to wait for me. You answered that you would not, because you did not believe I should ever come. I have come. I am 11 years late. I am asking you again, Marisol Vance, will you marry me?" There was a sound, somewhere in the ballroom, that might have been a glass falling. She did not look at the ballroom. She looked only at him. And then, very slowly, the apothecary's daughter from Saltcombe by the Sands, with the storm-gray eyes and the dark plait and the ring in the cup of her hand, smiled. A small, slow, astonished, entirely private smile, and said, in a voice that did not carry, but that he heard perfectly, "Yes, Caspian, at last." It was 11 months later, in the long, soft, pewter dusk of an autumn that had nothing to do with storms, that she found the letter. She found it in the back of the 3rd drawer of the writing desk in his late father's study at Marchcombe House, a desk she had not, in 11 months as Duchess of Marchcombe, yet permitted herself to disturb. She had been looking, that evening, for a particular ledger of charitable accounts. She had found it. She had also found, beneath it, in a small packet tied with a faded blue ribbon, a single folded sheet of paper, addressed in a careful and schoolboy hand to His Grace, Caspian, when he is older, from his father, who is sorry. She brought the letter to him in the small green sitting room that had become, by long, unspoken habit, theirs in the evenings. He was reading by the fire. Brindle the dog, who had come up from Saltcombe in a basket on her wedding day, and never been parted from her since, lay across his feet. She sat down opposite him. She held out the letter. He took it. He read it. He read it twice. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, in the way of a man whose grief is very old and has been very quiet for a very long time. He knew, Caspian said softly. He knew what he had done that night in the orchard, and he never, in all the years that followed, found the courage to say so to my face. What does it say? He read it aloud to her. It said that he had been a hard father and that he was sorry. It said that he had struck his son once with the buckle of a belt for a thing that hadn't deserved it, and that he had carried the memory of that blow more heavily than the boy he had struck would ever know. It said that he had not, after that night, been able to look at his son's face without feeling it. It said that he had arranged, in time, what he believed to be the best of all possible matches for that son, in the hope of mending in the public world what he could not bring himself to mend in the private one. It said that he understood now that he had been a coward. It said that he hoped the boy would, by then, have been brave enough to do what the father had not. Find the girl from the orchard, and ask her forgiveness, and ask her, if it was not too late, to marry him. It was signed, your father, who loved you and was a fool. She wept, quietly, when he had finished. He came around the small table, and he sat on the low stool at her feet, the way he had sat on the wooden chair beside her cot in the back room at Saltcombe, and he laid his head against her knee. She put her hand into his dark hair. He knew, she said. Even then, he knew you would come. He knew I should have come sooner. He forgave himself in the end for hoping you would. That is more than most fathers manage. He was quiet a long time. Brindle, from the hearthrug, gave one of his slow, contented sighs. The fire ticked. Outside, the last of the light was leaving the park, and in the blue dusk a single late thrush was calling, very simply, to nothing in particular. Marisol. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow night. She smiled, with her hand still in his hair. Tomorrow night was the eve of the new moon, the first new moon, by the careful reckoning of an apothecary's daughter, since the new moon that had once been the deadline of her 16 days. Each year, on that night, for as long as they should both live, they had agreed on a small, private observance. They would walk down, together, to the stone stair at the bottom of the cove. They would carry one lantern between them. They would stand on the third step from the top, which was, even now, still loose, and they would say nothing in particular. They would only stand. They would only remember. It was their tradition. It was their proof that the most important thing that had ever happened to either of them had begun in a place no one else knew, on a night no newspaper had recorded, between a man with no name and a woman with warm hands. And my love. There is one thing more I have not yet told you. He lifted his head from her knee. He looked at her. There was a small, slow, almost mischievous light kindling in his gray eyes. What thing? She took his hand. She laid it, very lightly, very deliberately, on the soft place just below her heart. He understood at once. He did not speak. His eyes filled. He bent his head, very slowly, and pressed his forehead against the place where his hand rested, and stayed there a long time. When he lifted his face at last, he was smiling. A son? Or a daughter? Father says a daughter, by the way I am carrying her. Father is wrong about most things, but he is rarely wrong about that. What shall we name her? Honoria, Marisol said softly, if you will permit it, for your sister, for the girl in the green-walled room who liked the orchard apples best. He could not speak. He only nodded against her, and held her, and held her, and held her. Outside, in the soft pewter of the autumn dusk, the thrush went on calling. Brindle, on the hearthrug, slept. The fire ticked down. And somewhere in the long, kind, ordinary darkness of a house no longer hunted, a man who had once known only one name in all the world fell asleep, at last, against the warm body of the woman who had given him back the rest of them. Thank you for being here. You are why these stories live, because you believe in love that endures forgetting, in courage, chosen over comfort, in second chances that arrive 11 years late, and still, somehow, in time. Your presence makes this small place warm. If a moment in this story moved you, a name, a glance, a promise made on a wet cliff path, tell me. Your favorite scenes shape what comes next. And if you would like more stories of memory, mercy, and love that chooses to stay, consider subscribing. Thank you, truly, for spending this evening with Caspian and Marisol. You make this corner of the world a kind one.